Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of The Numbers. Philippe, it is a beautiful day here in Ottawa. How is it looking out there in Montreal?
It's sunny and it's spring and it's beautiful. And I know it's global warming that cut a part of our winters. But the thing is, it's gonna happen. We'll have to do something about it. But meanwhile, we can enjoy at least the benefits of it, having an early spring. I'm not I don't want to be a doomsday here, but I love an early spring. So loving this right now. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I find it weird how short this winter has been. I like cross-country skiing, and I think we only managed to go out once, two or three times this year. Last year it was probably twice as much. And here in Ottawa, the canal was only skatable for 10 days. Last year was 0 days. A few years ago, when we had the really low weather, it was open for, I think, 50, 60 days. So anyway, things are changing.
Yes, they are. Yeah. Well, I mean, we know. Well, let's move on to politics then.
Okay. All right. We
What
did have a
happened this
political
week,
event this week,
That's right.
and we talked about it on our patrons only episode last week. So this was the by-election in Durham. So this is the riding in the Eastern GTA. Was Aaron O'Toole's old riding. He had won it by a pretty comfortable margin last time. It's been Conservative since 2004. It was not exactly about who would win, but it was about what kind of swing we'd see in the polls. So here, I'll just go through the numbers.
Right.
Jamil Javani of the Conservatives won with 57.4% of the vote. That was up 11 points over Aaron O'Toole's performance in 2021. Robert Rock of the Liberals had 22.5%. He was down 7 points, 7.4. Chris Borgia of the NDP had 10.4%. That was down 7.1 points. And Patricia Conlon of the PPC, who had run actually the previous year as well, or in 2021, was down 1.1 points to 4.4%. So the PPC vote kind of still held up. And the Greens, who didn't have a candidate in 2021, took 2.2%, and there was a number of other candidates there. We did a live stream of the results. When we went off the air, I think Giovanni was at 54 or something like that, but he seemed to be creeping up. He ended up at 57.4. What was your initial takeaway from these results?
Well, as I said on a live stream, and I'll repeat it here, we have to be careful not to overreact to by-elections. We tend, I think, as a whole, to overreact. But look at these results, and they seem to confirm the swing that polls have measured in Ontario, meaning that the Conservatives are up somewhere between 7 and 10 or 11 points province-wide, which would produce a Conservative majority in itself. The Liberals are down by about the same amount. And the NDP, well, remember when we did our over-under, I did put the line, the NDP, pretty low, and they still managed.
I was surprised by how low it was.
And they still managed to get under that, rather.
Yeah.
And so I think there are some lessons to take here. Again, we should not overreact to those results. It was supposed to be a Conservative win, and it was. But gaining 11 points for the Conservatives has to feel really good for Pierre Poilievre and his team, because this is the message that they wanted to send with this by-election, right?
Yeah. We had a question that we'll get to in the mailbag about the NDP and sort of their by-election performances, so we can talk about that at that point. But the big story for me in this is that it confirms where the polls are, right?
Yeah.
So it's not about overreacting to, oh my God, they went up 11 points. Oh my God, the Liberals dropped 7, blah, blah. It's more that these are the results that we more or less expected. Yep. So it tells us that the polls that are showing the Conservatives in the low 40s are not just polling mirages. We have voters that have actually reflected these numbers. Same thing for the Liberals, down. Not as much as maybe you would have thought with the polls, but again, there could have been some, turnout by-election kind of impacts there. So I think that's really the big takeaway, that since the Conservatives moved ahead in the polls by a big margin, we haven't had a real example of it. And this is the first example we have of it. And, like what I find interesting about this number, that they had 57%, is that if your projections, my projections, have the Conservatives somewhere around 200 seats, right?
Yeah.
If the only thing we knew was that the Conservatives won 200 seats, you would guess that they would get probably around 57% in a riding like Durham, right?
That's
so
right.
I think that's what the takeaway from the by-election is, not that This was a crushing defeat for the Liberals or a huge victory for the Conservatives. It was, but the importance of it is that it confirms the numbers that we've seen in the polls over the last few months. And that, I think, is the value often of by-elections.
Exactly. It allows us to readjust to the narrative. As I said, also my projections are not made for by-elections. There are local effects during by-elections that can surprise us, such as the NDP voters not coming out. But last Sunday, so before the by-election, my projection for Durham had the Conservatives at 55% and the Liberals at 20%. And it ended up 57 and 22. Is it 22?
22 and a half, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that shows that the voters of Durham have switched about as much as the most Ontario voters have switched. Now, the NDP, I had the NDP at 20 in this writing, and they did not, they barely broke double digits. So again, if your voters decide not to come out, they're not enthusiastic enough about their candidate, to come out in any by-elections where you're not the favorite, that's a bad sign. It's a bad sign because your organization, they need practice. A by-election should be practice. I mean, the PPC got their vote out. The Greens had not even a candidate, and they managed to get some vote out. The NDP machine here is really missing on opportunities to get ready for the general election, I feel.
Yeah, I think that's really important point. Like that was, I discussed it on my podcast last week about how by-elections are these testing grounds, right? Exactly. And so the Conservatives sent organizers there. They said, Jenny Byrne went there. I'm sure, as you mentioned, they wanted to make sure they had a really strong result, but it's also a little place to make sure that things are running okay, some new systems that they're going to implement work. And the Liberals did the same thing. They sent lots of cabinet ministers, they sent some MPs. Who knows, maybe they would have done even worse had that not happened. But if you're a local volunteer or a volunteer, let's say from the Toronto area who was going into Durham to help out, and you see that the cabinet ministers were there, maybe you're going to feel a little bit more engaged in the next campaign. These are still important, and the fact that maybe the Liberals didn't really have much of a shot, that the NDP was almost never going to do any better than what they did before, there still should have been more of an effort to at least, as you said, kind of grease the wheels, make sure things are operating right. You mentioned the PPC.
Well, just a minute before you go on to that. I mean, just imagine the scenarios. What would have been the headline, except for Conservative win? Just imagine if the NDP had surpassed the Liberals in Durham. Yeah. I mean, just imagine what it would do to the psyche, to the morale, right? And they
would have been worth a huge amount for the NDP.
Of course. And so you can't get your vote. I mean, you get the voters out. This politics. It's democracy. That's the name of the game. You get your voters out. And the NDP again, it's not the first time, doesn't do that. Sorry, you were saying about the PPC?
Well, yeah, because they've dropped a little. They haven't dropped a huge amount in the polls. We should say that because their last result in the last election was 5%. They still end up somewhere at 3-4% in some polls. So some of their numbers are still sticking around, and they only dropped 1 point here. But I just find it interesting that in 2021 you combine the Conservative and the PPC vote, and you get about 52%, right? Now you combine the Conservative and the PPC vote, and you get, 62%?
Yeah.
That is interesting because one of the theories of the 2021 campaign is that the Conservatives need the PPC vote. They need to push it down. Doesn't seem like they do. That, maybe it could have been that their vote came out and the other ones didn't. I don't think that's usually how it works entirely. That might explain some of it. But clearly, the Conservatives are taking support away from the Liberals and the NDP, as well as the PPC. So I just find that an interesting proof point because when you see the PPC at 3 to 4% in the polls, you're like, it's a poll, and there's always going to be for the smaller parties. Sometimes they're overrepresented in polls, and that's often the case that they underperform their polls. But then you see a result like this, you're like, okay, maybe they still can get 3 to 4% of the vote. And what impact does that have on the next election? I think it's an interesting, tiny little thing. Probably not important in terms of winning and losing, but still an interesting little thing, I find.
Here's the thing, though. The Conservatives needed the PPC vote when they were at 35.
Yeah.
But they're at 41 or 42 right now, so they don't need it anymore. I mean, they would take it if they could attract some of those voters. But right now, they do not need the PPC. If the PPC still, as you said, if they still hang around 3-4% nationally, some higher in some regions, lower in other regions, but the Conservatives right now are so dominant that they don't need to do. I don't want to say pander, but you know what I mean. They don't need to get those voters anymore because they have their winning coalition. I said that in the fall. I mean, the Conservatives hold their winning coalition. They don't need to grow anymore. They just have to hold until the next general.
So last week on our patrons only episode, we did do an over-under. So, we're all about accountability. We're all about transparency. So we need to go over it to see who did better. So you had set the PPC at 2.5. You chose the under. I chose the over, but I didn't think they'd get 4.4. I thought they'd do just a little bit better than that. You had then set the green line as more than the PPC.
That's right.
And we both chose the over. Did not.
We're wrong.
That's, I find, a little bit of an interesting thing because the Greens have been doing okay in the polls, especially in Ontario. I should say, in the context of the Greens.
Right.
And they only got 2% here. That's not a strong result because in 2019, they got 5.4. And before that, in the 10 years before that, they got 4, 5, 11, 5, 4. They got 11% in 2008. 2.2 is not very good.
That 21 campaign for the Greens still lingers here.
Yeah, I think it does. NDP, like you said, you put it at 13. You chose the under, and you were the genius. I chose the over. They like really kind of were under it. And that was a low under. I was surprised. And even on our live stream, I reminded you that on the live stream, I reminded you had put 13. And you're like, I did? That's, For the Liberals, the line was 20. We both chose the over, so we were correct on that. And then for the Conservatives, we put the line at 54. You chose the over. I chose the under to be different. I'm not actually surprised.
It's close. It was a good line. It's close. Yeah. I mean, the line was 54 and he got 57. So
our lines were actually pretty good.
All of them,
actually.
Well,
they're pretty good.
Okay.
For the most part.
The Greens. Yeah. Okay.
Not the Greens and PPC.
We
actually, still within 2 points. Anyway, do you want to announce who was the winner?
Well, so Éric got 2 right out of 5 parties, and I had 3 correct out of 5 parties, and so I would say I win in overtime because that NDP number, I don't know what I was thinking. It was way too low, and yet the NDP managed to
it wasn't too low.
Go under the par. So it wasn't too low, but it felt...
Imagine you had set the line at 11. I would have been like, what? Come on.
What are you doing? Thing is, also, as I said, my projection had the NDP close to 20% in Durham. I was like, they're not going to do that in a by-election. I guess I probably should have taken 15 or something, but don't bet on the NDP beating their the expectations in a by-election. This is my new rule.
That's the new lesson. Yeah. All right, we do have some more by-elections coming up. So there's 3 vacancies: Elmwood, Transcona, Manitoba; Toronto, St. Paul's in Ontario; and LaSalle, Aymard, Verdun in Montreal. But those could be within the next, because even Elmwood, Transcona isn't going to be vacant until the end of the month. So, we might only have our next by-election rounds in June. And I was looking at this. There's a potential that they could be the last by-elections because there's a 9-month gap where you can't call a by-election. Okay?
So it's January?
Before the general.
Yeah.
And then there's a 6-month waiting period for having to call a by-election. So you could more or less say that once we get to the 15-month mark before the next election, we might not have another by-election if there's a vacancy that takes place after that. Any vacancy that takes place before or around July will have to have a by-election. But anything after July, it'll be up to the government to decide if they even want to bother. So maybe we'll only have one more night together with by-elections.
Well, it's okay. We'll make up for it for provincial elections. Yeah, we'll have fun with those if they come, when they come.
They'll happen. They'll happen. All right. We did have a few national polls. One came out just today on Thursday when we're recording. We had the Nanos one. I wanted to mention it because we talked about it a little bit last week. Obviously, Nanos is every week. They just update with another 250 respondents, dropping the 250 respondents from 4 weeks ago. So the latest numbers was 43 Conservative, 23 Liberal, 21 NDP. Last week, it was a 1-point gap between the Liberals and the NDP. So as we had mentioned, there's lots of ups and downs in the NDP, in the Nanos poll because of the way that they do it. So it looks like the NDP isn't going back down on its trajectory. So we'll see if anybody has that. But Angus Reid had some similar numbers.
Yep. Yeah, 40% for the Conservatives, 23 for the Liberals, 21. So 23 and 21 reappear. But just to go back to Nanos here, I mean, it's notable that I looked to make sure it is the first time since I don't remember when that the Conservatives have a poll where they're plus 20. So we
You're
said
right, plus 20,
yeah, plus 20. So if I mean we talked about this earlier. If a party leads by 15, you will see the odd plus 12 and plus 17. But if a party leads by 17 or 18, you will see the odd plus 20 or plus 21. It will happen. But it's a first poll that shows 20 points ahead for the Conservatives ahead of the Liberals. And of course, we won't divulge information behind the paywall, but I'll just say this, though, one tiny bit. This poll has the Conservatives up 25 points in Ontario. That would just be devastating, like even more than what we had in recent weeks. Devastating for the Liberals. So
some of the regional numbers in the Angus Reid poll, more or less what we see all the time. One of the benefits we have from this poll is because it's so big. Their sample is 3,400. They have breakdowns for the Maritimes at least. Well, no, for most of Atlantic Canada, but not PI.
Yeah.
And they have a breakdown for Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And Saskatchewan is, as you might expect, or maybe not as you might expect, but as you should start expecting.
Yeah.
The most conservative place in the country, 62% support for the Conservatives, 25% for the NDP, 9% for the Liberals. Sample's nearly 300, so it's not too bad. And then Manitoba, I'm focusing on these because we never get them.
Yeah.
49% for the Conservatives, 29% for the NDP, and 19% for the Liberals. I don't remember offhand what the results were in Manitoba last time, but
49 seems high. I can look this up, but 49% is
that is a big number. But the 29 for the NDP is actually not too bad either. So they'll be able to keep their numbers. And then out in the East Coast, there was a 12-point lead for the Conservatives in New Brunswick, which, that's a number of seats there. An 11-point lead in Nova Scotia. Again, many seats there. And the NDP was only 5 points behind. So, you're looking at a seat like Halifax that could easily go NDP. And then this was perhaps the biggest surprise. In Newfoundland and Labrador, 51% for the Conservatives, 16-point lead over the Liberals. Seamus O'Regan might be the last man standing, last Liberal standing in Newfoundland and Labrador after the next election with these kinds of numbers.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but even Harper did not win the vote in Newfoundland.
I think he did in 2006. He might have.
Oh, in the first one? Because I know that 2011, I remember that it was the only province outside of Quebec that the Conservatives did not win the popular vote, even though they did win many seats there.
Well, Danny Williams did his anyone but Conservative campaign in 2008, and that's where their vote just tanked, and then they didn't really come back. 2006, they were starting to do better. I can't recall if they won the popular vote, but they were doing okay in Newfoundland and Labrador in 2006. But that collapsed after that. So this is a return in a way.
Yeah. I pulled up the numbers from the last election. Manitoba, it was 39 Conservative, 28 Liberal, 23 NDP. Now, of course, it's 264 cases, so it's still uncertain, but that's still 10 points more for the Conservatives and about 10 points less for the Liberals.
Yeah, but 6 points more for the NDP. So maybe they're able to hold off the... that's why I really want to... That Elmwood Transcona by-election will be interesting because it'll give us a test. And the other number I think we probably need to talk about here, 21% for the Liberals in Quebec.
That's right.
Which is what was also in the Léger poll that we talked about in last week's episode. Bit of a difference for where the Bloc and the Conservatives stand. In this one, the Bloc's at 36, the Conservatives at 23. Léger had 32-29.
That's right.
But the fact that there's two polls with 21% for the Liberals in Quebec, yikes.
Is the floor just collapsing under the feet of the Quebec the Liberals in Quebec? If we look at the map of the federal results in Quebec in 21, many cabinet ministers including François-Philippe Champagne, would probably lose with those numbers.
Yeah.
Probably
almost all of the cabinet ministers outside of Montreal.
That's right. That's right.
Because I think you went through them in our French language podcast, and I'm not sure if there's any others.
Duclos, Le Boutillier. If those numbers translated to the ballot boxes a year and a half from now, the Liberals will be confined to Montreal and a bit in Outaouais. Greater Montreal, I would say, but in Outaouais. So, I mean, really bad polls for the Liberals. We sound like a broken record, but they keep coming.
Yeah.
And we had a by-election that pretty much agrees with the polling we see. So if the Liberals thought they could cruise because, oh, no, it's just a few bad months. It's just a phase. People will come back. Perhaps not.
Yeah. There was some other questions in the poll. One of them I thought was interesting was about the confidence and supply agreement.
Yeah.
And whether they think it's working great or well. Conservatives do not think it's working well.
Well,
I know. I was surprised by that. But so in June of last year, 73% of Liberals thought it was working well. It's now 72%. So Liberal voters seem to be fine with it, although these are Liberal voters from 2021, so it's not like a changing group of voters.
Yeah.
So they're still fine with it. And for the NDP, they actually think it works a little bit better now. It's up 4 points to 63%. So at least among those voters, not a lot of... I mean, obviously there's some people who don't think it's working well, but majority seem to be okay with it hanging on for a little while longer.
And bloc voters also. I mean, it's a small sample, of course, but not that small. I mean, it was over 500 for Quebec, I think.
Yeah.
46% believe it. I mean, of course, when you ask this question, for those who are aware of what's going on in Ottawa, what you hear is, yeah, I'm glad the NDP is supporting Liberals because I don't want the Conservatives to win.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't go much deeper into that. Perhaps NDP voters are happy about this first version of pharmacare. I know there was also some numbers on this from Research Co. this week. I'll talk about that a bit later. We are in a stalemate right now where we see the Conservatives on the horizon with a crushing majority, and Liberals and NDP just holding their breath, hoping they can last that long, right? Last until the fall of 25. So,
well, we didn't have any provincial polls this week, so we can move along to the questions if you're ready.
Questions. All right. I'll start if I may.
Yeah.
Ali Gersor on the Discord ask us, is the consistent underperformance of the NDP in by-elections a recent phenomenon or a persisting long-term trend that extends beyond Singh's leadership? It's a good question. I mean, it seems that all recent by-elections, the NDP seems to just don't get their vote out. We mentioned it a few minutes ago. But historically, has that been the case? I think you did some little research, Éric, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. That's why, for me, you really shouldn't read too much into the NDP's numbers in by-elections. I think, if I recall correctly, the last 27 by-elections, they've only increased their support in 2 of them, which tells you a lot. So, since 2021, since the last election, they've lost an average of 6 points in by-elections. In 2020, the only 2 by-elections that took place between 2019 and 2021, they lost an average of 5. And then in 2015 to 2019, they lost an average of 6 points. So there's a pretty consistent trend there of 5 to 6 points losing in a by-election. Now, that's under Jagmeet Singh. It was also the case in the last parliament where the NDP was the official opposition. Between 2011 and 2015, the NDP lost an average of 7 points. And this was at a time when they were actually polling okay.
Yeah.
And at some points, they were actually leading in the polls during that time. They just do not do well in by-elections when they aren't a factor. When they are a factor, they more or less behave like any other party. The the last few years, by-elections where the NDP gained support was Jagmeet Singh and Burnaby South. He was a leader. Yeah. And in Ottawa-Vanier, where they had a decent local candidate and was the second party there, and they increased their support a little bit. But when they're not in the running, their vote just does not bother to come out. And like you said, I think that suggests a bit of a more kind of systemic problem for the party. that they can't get that their core, not their core, because their core comes out. It's that extra little bit, not that attached to the party, not enough to bother voting in a by-election.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the reality of when you have a lot of support among young people.
That's certainly part of it. But still, I mean, you want to get out of this loser mentality. I mean, you think that you have a chance to surpass the Liberals. You think you want to replace the Liberals as the center-left party in Canada. That tells me that you don't have the organization. And even though you did have a good run in 2011, you had a chance to surpass the Liberals, you still can't get your voters out. I don't know. It says a lot about the organization, I think. Even though you would say it doesn't matter, a loss is a loss, and you're right, a loss is a loss. But still, you have to show up. So anyway,
James LeBlanc on Patreon, he said, one thing that I haven't seen people discussing regarding the possibility of Trudeau resigning is the NDP voting non-confidence shortly after. Could this be a reason against resigning, and is there any precedent of a government having to face an election with a caretaker interim leader? I don't know if you can think of any provincial, but I was thinking about federal precedents. The only precedent I could really think of was and I know remember this election well, the 1896 federal election.
Wow.
So John A. Macdonald died very shortly after he won his last election in 1891. And then there was a kind of a rotating crew of prime ministers that came in. There was John Abbott, who was there for a little while, John Thompson, who died at Queen Victoria's dinner table. There was Mackenzie Bowell, who was very unpopular. And then they named Charles Tupper,
right,
the leader of the Conservatives and the prime minister, just before the 1896 election, because Bowell had this cabinet revolt where most of his cabinet quit. It was over a language issue separate schools in Manitoba. Most of the cabinet quit. They named Charles Tupper so close to the election that he actually never stood in the House of Commons as prime minister. Wow. So he's sort of a caretaker interim leader, although he did end up staying on for the 1900 election. That is really the only case. And in that one, the Conservatives did not do well. The Liberals under Laurier won. But aside from that, we don't really have a history of caretaker prime ministers or interim prime ministers.
I mean, Kim Campbell was not a caretaker. She won the leadership.
Yeah. If she would have won that election, she would have been prime minister for a term, right?
Yeah. And Turner in '84 was not a caretaker. I mean, he was also so there were some short-lived prime ministerships, but no, I can't. I mean, the only one that I can think of is because the quiz I gave you a few weeks ago was W.A.C. Bennett in BC. When the Social Credit won in the early 50s, they didn't have a leader. They didn't have a full-time leader. Yeah. They chose their leader after winning the election. But they were not a government leader. Yeah. So
there is some cases of like opposition parties having an interim kind of caretaker leader. You could say Pierre Trudeau was in 1980, right? Because he had already announced he was going to resign.
Yeah.
And then the election gets called, and he's like, I guess I'll stick around. But he at that point he wasn't in government anymore. So,
but the thing
do you
is,
think the NDP would do that?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Well, if the NDP, I mean, one thing we shouldn't say about the NDP is that they have some killer instinct. They don't. And so, why would they do that if it's not in their interest? It really isn't in their interest. Their polls right now, and they're not looking good. I mean, also, the Bloc could stop this, right? It's not like the NDP has all the levers in this parliament. The Bloc could stop this. Perhaps they wouldn't. Perhaps they would. But I don't see why the NDP. I mean, unless their numbers greatly improve over the next few months, and they smell blood in the water with an interim leader, whoever that may be. But I don't see why they would do this. Also, can you just vote no confidence? Can you just put a motion of no confidence? If I'm the Liberals and that happens, I just prorogue Parliament and say, okay, we'll take a break for 2 months and we'll be back. I don't know. It doesn't seem a realistic scenario.
unless it's a vote on something that is a vote of confidence, like a budget vote or something like that, I think you need an opposition day to actually put forward your motion on confidence. You can't just stand up and be like, let's vote on confidence.
I demand
There's
confidence.
No one here. Yeah. But you mentioned the research poll on pharmacare. It is polls have always shown that people like the idea of pharmacare. It's just a question of whether they prioritize it. And so would the NDP risk not having that implemented? Yeah. Something that they fought for, that they're saying they're taking credit for it being implemented or coming, or at least the modified version of it. Would they then be the ones who pull out the knives and be like, no, let's forget it. Let's go to an election where conservatives will come in and absolutely not do this. I mean, they could still feel like that it's their chance to place second and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think it's a likely scenario.
Although the speculation on who the interim leader and then interim prime minister would be, that would be interesting. Somebody not.
I was wondering who. I was thinking about that. Who would be the elder statesman or stateswoman who would come in to lead the party in the interim? But anyway,
we'll have a draft soon.
Yeah, we should.
If the thing is, if Justin Trudeau resigns, it's going to be right away. We won't have time to do a draft. But let's say, we'll talk about it. This is a topic that will come in time, I'm sure.
Yes. Okay. John Fraser on Patreon asks, what party in today's political environment has a more diverse voting bloc? Are the Conservatives still the largest big tent party? What do you think?
I mean, if we're talking federal here, well, the Conservatives have been the largest big tent since their unification in 2003. Yes, they haven't won every election since then, but their vote never got under, 31%? What did Harper get in 2004?
I think he got like 31.9 something.
And I think their floor is pretty high. The floor, I mean, even when Andrew Scheer lost, and it was a real loss, he ran up the score in the prairies to win the popular vote. They still had 34% of the vote. So I think it's clear that it's the Conservatives. The Liberal can surpass Conservatives if they siphon out voters from other parties, such as the NDP. But as a base, as the biggest, it's the Conservatives.
Just to look at the Angus Reid poll that came out, so they have it broken down by age group and gender.
Yeah,
the Conservatives are leading among men of all age groups, including 18 to 34. They have a 14-point lead over the NDP in this poll. And among women, the only group they don't lead is among 18 to 34. They lead among 35 to 54 and 55 over. They're 4 points behind the Liberals, actually, which is interesting. But they've got pretty broad swath, right? Their lowest support, 22% among women 18 to 34. Their highest, 53% men 35 to 54. They have a wide swath. You see polls of, visible minorities, immigrants, different education levels, different income levels. The Conservatives are doing really well pretty much among all groups. And even the ones where they're doing bad, they're still not doing that bad, right?
That's right.
22% for the Conservatives among women 18 to 34. I'm going to guess that they wouldn't have had that support in 2021.
Male from 35 to 54, you said it, 53% for the Conservatives, 18 NDP, 16 Liberal. And this is a huge sample. This is a big sample of voters. So, more than half of Canadian males from 35 to 54 support the Conservatives. That's a strong voting bloc to count on for the
if you're talking to a guy who's 35 or older, at least a 1 in 2 chance that he's going to vote for Pierre Poilievre. There you go. Do you want to do a quiz?
All right, Éric. So I have a quiz for you this week. It's a format we have used in the past, but I thought it was simple and kind of fun as well. So we use this format in our French podcast, Les Chiffres. So I chose an election where 3 parties did okay. I read you 3 writings from that election, and you have one goes Conservative, one goes Liberal, and one goes NDP, one of each. And you have to put the pieces in the right place. And for this, I mean, we have several good elections to pick. I decided to go with one that stood out in Ontario. So, Ontario provincial election, 1990. Bob Rae NDP majority. So you were a young boy when that happened. I was too. But I'm sure you still remember it and you've studied it. It's a very interesting election. The only time the NDP ever won government in Ontario. Let me just pull this up here.
I have one story from that. When Bob Rae won in 1990, I was very young. And I always thought that the song Barbara Ran by the Beach Boys was actually Bob Rae. I thought it was Bob Rae. That's what I thought. I really thought that because I was young enough to believe that a song would be written about the Ontario Premier. Anyway, continue.
A song that was already like 25 years old at the time, but sure.
I didn't know that. I was like 7.
Okay, so again, I have 7 rounds. To claim victory, you have to have at least 5 of those rounds, and you have 1 Liberal, 1 NDP, and 1 Progressive Conservative. Are you ready, my friend?
Yes.
We are starting on the western half of Toronto. I mean, hang on, my tables here are too small. I'm getting old. I have to write that bigger. Okay, so are you ready?
Yes.
Etobicoke, or as I said for most of my adult life, Etobicoke, Humber, York South, and Etobicoke West.
I'm pretty sure York South has a long history of being an NDP riding. I actually think that might have been one of the former leaders. Anyway, so I'm going to give York South to the NDP. You had Etobicoke Humboldt and Etobicoke...
Humber and Etobicoke West.
Etobicoke West. That, to me, I have zero clue. I'll say West was Liberal, Humber was PC.
York South was the seat of Bob Rae, so it did go.
Yes, that's what I thought.
NDP.
Okay.
But you switch Humber and West. West went to the PCs, and Humber went to Jim Henderson of the Ontario Liberals. Okay. Oh, also, when going through for that quiz, I chose like almost all the time neighboring ridings, which is interesting because they were a big mix. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going into Southwest Ontario. London Centre, London North, and Essex South. 1 Liberal, 1 NDP, 1 PC.
Well, one of those is David Peterson's riding. I think he... I'm going to see... Was he north or center? I'm going to say he was center, so that would be Liberal, because I think he did win. I don't think he was defeated in 1990. Essex South, which would be down closer to Windsor. That should be a rural riding, but the Liberals did well back then in those areas. This is going to be tough. I'm going to mess up all the PC and Liberal ones. I'm going to give the Liberals Essex South and the PCs London North.
And London Centre, the NDP?
And London Centre to the Liberals. No, you're right. Oh, sorry.
I'll let you rephrase
Essex South NDP, London Centre Liberals, London North PCs.
Okay. London North did go to the PC. Diane Cunningham. London Centre was the seat of David Peterson, but he was defeated.
Oh, he was defeated.
He was defeated by a pretty big margin. He lost by 24 points. It's the NDP that won London Centre, and Essex South was Liberal by a hair. Remo Mancini of the Ontario Liberals.
Oh, no. Oh, boy, okay. I got to run the table for the rest.
You have to run the table. Well, we're going close to your hometown of Ottawa. Do you consider Ottawa your hometown? You lived there for a while, right?
No one who is from Ottawa considers it their hometown. Who lives in Ottawa?
But you're an Ottawan?
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
yeah, I've lived here now for 16 years.
Okay. All right, we're going into the Ottawa region. Ottawa West, Ottawa Centre, and Carleton in the 1990 provincial Ontario election.
Ottawa Centre, I think, would be NDP. So I think that was Michael Cassidy's old riding. Ottawa West and Carleton.
Do you have one that you're sure of out of three? Or is this just a blur of the three?
I'm not sure, actually, because when I think about it, I'm wondering if the NDP actually won Ottawa West. I'm going to not do well here. I'm going to say Ottawa Centre NDP, Ottawa West PC, Carleton PC, Ottawa West Liberal, Ottawa Centre NDP.
Ottawa Centre was NDP. Evelyn Gigantes. Okay, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Ottawa West was Liberal, Bob Chiarelli.
Yes.
And Carleton was PCs by a pretty fair margin in an election where the PCs didn't do so well. So Norman Sterling of the PCs. Okay, that was close. You have your first point. You have to run the table. Where are we going now? Okay, we're in Eastern Ontario, however, outside of the Ottawa region. Leeds, Granville, Renfrew North, and Frontenac, Addington. 1990 Ontario election. You know the area.
I'm trying to think which one. I'm usually starting with the NDP because they won most of the seats, so you would think that, which maybe not actually be the smart way, but Frontenac, Addington would be near Kingston. I think the NDP won that area, so I'm going to say the NDP goes to Frontenac. Leeds, Grenville, that's such a conservative riding in the past, so I'm going to say that was PC. And then Renfrew North, I guess Liberal.
Final answer?
Yeah.
All right. Renfrew North was Liberal. Sean Conaway. Frontenac, Addington, very split vote. The NDP won it, so you are correct. And Leeds, Grenville, Rob Runciman, crushing victory in Leeds, Grenville. So you have your second point. You have three left. Oof. You have to get all three. You're doing well. Okay. Going to the GTA here now. Let me just find them. Okay. All right. York Centre, Markham, and Durham, York.
Okay.
York Centre.
Durham, York, I'm going to say was PC. It might have even been like Aaron O'Toole's father. York Centre and Markham. York Centre is, it's closer to Toronto. I'm going to say it was NDP, and then Markham, I guess, Liberal.
You managed to miss all three.
I should get a point for that.
Markham was Don Cousins of the PCs by 20 points. York Centre was Liberal, Gregory Sorbaba. And Durham York, split vote, but Larry O'Connor of the NDP won it. So it's strange results. You are correct that...
There was a by-election in 2012 and when Aaron O'Toole won, and the NDP candidate was an O'Connor, and I think it might have actually been Larry O'Connor.
Oh, okay.
Maybe he was trying to make a comeback. Anyway.
Maybe. Okay, so you lost the quiz, but you can still lose reasonably with the last two that I have. We're going into Northern Ontario. Just pull it up. Okay. Timiskaming, Nipissing, and Nickel Belt.
Okay, well, this one I know that Nipissing is Mike Harris. Timiskaming and Nickel Belt. Nickel Belt has historically been NDP, so let's say that Nickel Belt is NDP, and Timiskaming, why not? We'll have it be Liberal.
And you are correct. Nipissing, Mike Harris of the PC. Timiskaming, the OLP with David Ramsey. And Nickel Belt was won easily by Floyd Lauren, the NDP. Okay. You have one last one. To have the majority, you have 3 out of 6 right now, so we're going to the last one, which I think is, I'm not going to give you des indices. Okay. No. Hints. So we're still in Northern Ontario, not the northernmost Ontario. Why? Because there are no PC seats there at all. Like I checked, there's no PC seats there. So here's what I chose. Parry Sound, Bruce, and Muskoka, Georgian Bay.
Muskoka.
How did I say?
Muskoka.
Okay, it's my accent. It's Muskoka. It's a U. Bruce, Parry Sound, and Muskoka, Georgian Bay. One Liberal, one NDP, one PCs.
Even that's surprising.
It is. I agree. Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea. Bruce, Liberal, Parry Sound, PC, Georgian Bay, NDP.
Bruce was won by the Liberals, Murray Elston. You may know Ernie Eves. He became premier. He won in Parry Sound for the PCs.
Hey, I pulled that one out.
Muskoka, Georgian Bay by
Muskoka.
the NDP. So you have the point here. It's
All
4
right.
out of 7. I think I don't have a tiebreaker on over and overtime.
I will take this as
but
an
I
honorable
think,
performance.
I would say like it's like a loss in overtime. You still get a point, and good job, Éric. That was pretty good from you.
All right. Yes, thank you very much. And you can send your congratulations to my hometown. All right, let's do a number of the week. I'm going to go first because mine's not too interesting, and hopefully yours is. Mine is going to be 11 because the gain that the Conservatives had in Durham, I think, is a significant one. It's the highest result they've had, as a modern kind of merged party, and it confirms the polls. And there were some Liberals who were still kind of hanging on to the party's by-election performances as an indication that things weren't really as bad as the poll suggested. Sort of the kind of thing you hear from Democrats in the United States who look at some of the election results and say, look, we're not losing these things or overperforming the polls.
Yeah.
But I think that the results in Durham, if you're still one of those Liberals who's still thinking that, the polls don't have it, that the by-elections are disproving it, I think the 11-point gain for the Conservatives in Durham should disprove that theory. Things are as good for Pierre Poilievre as the Conservatives as the polls seem to suggest.
Oh, yes, and when we have by-elections in Quebec, perhaps we'll see that the Liberals... even though it's not a representative seat, perhaps we'll see a Liberal drop there. We'll see. My number is 44. So to the question, if the Conservatives form the government after the next federal election, should they cancel the National Farmer Care Program? And 44% of Conservative voters disagreed that the Conservatives should not dismantle the Farmer Care Program, which I think is interesting. The Farmer Care Program, even though it is limited, it's not an all-comprehensive Farmer Care Program, it seems to be quite popular, even among Conservative voters. So a plurality of Conservative voters do not want the Conservatives to get rid of the Farmer Care Program, which I thought was interesting. So it may not be a big campaign issue like other issues for Poilievre.
And we'll have to see where it ends up actually standing by the next time. Many provincial premiers might do the job for him, right? And not have them have the program running in their provinces anyway. So we'll see. But yeah, there's some things that are Pharmacare. It polls surprisingly well, but like I said, I still doubt whether it's a voting issue for people.
Well, the thing is, even in Alberta, Daniel Smith already said, "Oh, we don't want that. We'll take the money instead." I look at I welcome the establishment of a national farmer care program in Alberta. It's 65% agree, 20% disagree. So even if it's a small sample, it's not even close. So perhaps some premiers will have to look at those polls before they make a decision. So we'll see.
And if I remember correctly, support for covering insulin, which is one of the things that is being covered here, was through the roof. Majority was strongly in favor of it, and then another, I think it was 52 or something like that, strongly in favor of it, and another 30% or so, somewhat in favor of it. If the program does come in and we have, people are having their diabetes medicine covered by the government, that's going to be a hard one to get rid of. That one will be a hard one to get rid of. It's hard to say to, diabetic people, yeah, never mind, we're going to take that back from you. We're not going to cover that anymore. All right, so that's it for this episode of The Numbers. As always, you can head to thenumberspod.ca to join our Patreon, where you can get early access to the episodes on Thursdays and access to our bonus episodes every second Thursday. Like next week, we'll have a bonus episode, and that'll be for our patrons. So you can go to thenumberspod.ca. You also get to join our Discord and ask us questions for the mailbag every week. So Philippe, hope you have a good week. We had the live stream earlier this week. We had the podcast today. So we'll see each other a little bit less over next week. So hopefully you'll be okay.
I'll miss you, Éric. I'll miss you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And I hope that you'll miss us too, listeners at home and viewers. But we'll be back in 7 days. All right.
Have a great week, man.